Welcome to P English Literature, a YouTube channel that conveys Amazon, Goodreads, blog, and video book reviews coupled with interviews with authors. It's a perfect channel for book lovers, authors, and writers generally. P English Literature, the exact channel for you and me. Hi there, viewers. Today I'm joining in conversation with Madam Christy Butterfly, the author of Curse of the Frog Prince Part 1. It's really a pleasure to have Madam Butterfly featured on P English Literature. Hi there, Madam Butterfly.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me on your show.
Yeah, it's really a pleasure to have you on the show, and I'm really excited to speak directly with you concerning your book, Curse of the Frog Prince Part 1. So, Madam Butterfly, without wasting much time, I'd love to move straight into the interview. And I want to specifically ask you, when was the first time you get acquainted with writing? When was the time you realized that you were going to become a writer? If there's any time you know that, you were going to become a writer that you'd love to share with us, that would be intriguing.
Well, for me, writing pretty much, I feel, was inevitable for me because when I was little, my mother was always reading books to me and encouraging me to read so that I would really get into the idea of reading a lot. And all throughout my childhood, I would usually have a book in my hand so that I could read in my spare time. Even when I was in high school, I remember one of my literature teachers would get really excited about the fact that I liked to read for fun. She would even ask me all the time, what am I reading? Because it was so easy for her to get me to read for fun, unlike a lot of the other kids who didn't even want to be bothered with books. And because I read for fun so much, I kept getting the idea that I was going to write a book. And I would always say to myself that I'm going to write a book. I'm going to write a book. But I was just mostly talking. I was not serious about actually doing it, even though I was always telling myself I would. Then when I got out of college, I was looking to get into the paralegal field. And while I was researching the best way to go into that line of work, I had a lot more time on my hands. So my brain told me, hey, you're always talking about writing a book. And now you have the time to actually write the darn book. Why not take a crack at it and see? So I sat down and started working on one of my story ideas, and I realized I had a real talent for writing books, and I've been writing ever since.
Wow, that's quite intriguing. Most writers often complain about time when it comes to writing, and it's quite intriguing to know that that was the first time you get acquainted with writing. It's actually it takes time, it consumes time, and I'm quite fascinated to get to know about that. Okay, there's something I also want to ask you. Writing has been viewed by different writers and different authors in different way. Some people, have the notion that writing fiction can be much more easier or like a difficult task compared to writing non-fiction, which is actually a real life story. Some people have the notion, or some people nurture the notion that fiction is quite difficult because of the tones of the imagination attached to it. And I want to specifically ask you because Curse of the Frog Prince is a fiction novel. How do you come about writing Curse of the Frog Prince? Because it's actually an impressive fiction novel. Did you see that something that is quite very difficult to do, or you find it extremely easy to navigate through?
Well, in my personal opinion, when it comes to whether or not fiction or nonfiction is easier, I mostly think that that just depends on the writer because in my case, fiction is much easier for me to write because if I were to write a nonfiction book, even if it's subject matter that I enjoy looking into, I would get so bored just because I would be treading over the same information over 1,000 times in order to write this book, and I would be just searching for minuscule differences to add to the book, and that would just really bore me, and I do not think I would be able to focus on it too well to really finish it easily. Versus fiction, I have so much fun creating all these worlds in my head and all these characters and learning about who they are, their wants, their needs. It's just so much fun, which makes fiction just so easy for me to write. Also, as to your question as to how I came about the idea for Curse of the Frog Prince, I had just joined an authors group because I was new to the world of authordom. So I needed to learn more about it, how to go about independently publishing along with many other factors. So when I went to the authors group meeting, they said how it's a good idea to have a bunch of short stories in addition to your big books, just to pad out the number of books you have on the market. And after they said that, my brain was thinking, no, 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 just absolutely not. Because at the time I was working on my original book idea, which is called Bloody Crowned. And at that time I was working on my book that I published later, which was my second book to publish, Violet Evergreen and the Seeds of Rebellion. Either way, at that time, I was working on both of them. It was a lot of work for me, and I was just going, no, 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 no. I'm not adding a bunch of short stories and adding to the amount of work I have to do. Absolutely not. And when I was leaving the meeting, I was still thinking that nonstop when suddenly, like a slap to the face, the idea for Curse of the Frog Prince popped into my head. And even though I didn't fully understand it, the majority of story just appeared to me. And I realized, hey, looks like I'm writing this short story. And I was admittedly a little surprised that I had gotten an entire book idea that quickly after I was, throwing a little mini fit about how I wasn't going to do it.
Yeah. I think it's subjected to the writer's idea, like the writer's opinion, because some people can find it easy. Because myself particularly, I see fiction as a difficult thing to do. That's why I'm always intrigued whenever I read a fiction novel, and it's quite impressive. I'm like, wow, how do you just come about sitting down, framing a story, imagining it, and putting it down, compared to non-fiction, which actually a real life story, take for instance, you're reading an historical tale, etc., something related to that. And I'm really excited to know that about it. Okay, there's also something I find quite fascinating when I read through, Curse of the Frog Prince Part 1. That's the part where you made mention about the midnight being the perfect time to making a curse and breaking a curse. So I want to specifically ask you, I don't know if you love to expand more on this theme of the midnight as being the perfect time in making and breaking a curse compared to other part of the day like morning, afternoon, and evening. Would you love to, expand more on this subject?
The significance of midnight was actually not something I was originally intending to add to the story. While I was coming up with the condition for the frog curse, I started thinking about ways to add more significance to it, and it occurred to me that in a lot of fairy tales, they're always talking about at the stroke of midnight, this curse will end, or the stroke of midnight, this will happen. And I was thinking, all these stories, they talk about midnight being when spells or curses or whatever would end, but they don't explain it. They just say it happens. And I'm thinking, you know what? In my story, I gotta add some significance to midnight and mix it up in the curse of when to cast a curse or to break a curse and give it that type of significance since it's mentioned in a lot of fairy tale stories. So what I did to make midnight make sense for my story was to say midnight is basically this in between time that messes with magic, because midnight significantly is when a old day ends and a new day begins all at the same time. So because the old and new day are occurring at once, it causes a kind of split that messes with magic.
Yeah, yeah, I can really understand that because one of the reasons why I actually asked you because I know there's some kind of characteristics that is intrinsically, particular to midnight alone, and that's why most prayers are said at the night. That's why most evil deeds are being carried out at the midnight, being the ending of a new day and the beginning of a new day, the ending of an old day rather, and the beginning of a new day. So I'm really, really, fascinated to know that about that. There's also something I find quite exceptional while I read through your book, and that's your storytelling techniques, which is actually very brilliant and fascinating. I was going to ask you, do you take this fiction over a particular author? I don't know if there's any kind of author you take this fiction to resemble. And I want to ask you, if it's so, what's the name of the author and how has this particular author writing style, influence yours?
Well, when it comes to my writing style, I always want the characters in my books to feel real and situation stuff to just have this realistic feeling like this is something that could happen in the real world, even though it's clearly a fantasy story. And when I first started trying to write that way, I did feel a little nervous, like, oh my goodness, can I really achieve this? And what really got me to push myself to keep trying to write that way is when I read Achebe's book called Things Fall Apart. Because in his book, yes, it's more of a fictional story set in a realistic version of the world. Basically, I'm saying it's a fictional story in a real world setting. It was still fiction, and it just, the way he writes, well, the way he wrote it, it just felt so real. Like this is just something I could stumble across and I could find. And I was enjoying how he just achieved what I have been trying to do with making everything feel super real. And that just encouraged me to keep pushing myself to make my fantasy stories feel more realistic. Even though obviously frogs don't talk, but I wanted you to feel like, yeah, you could stumble across a talking frog.
Wow, I don't wish to stumble across a talking frog. I'll be scared and I'll pick up my race. That's very fascinating. The idea of the talking frog is actually intriguing because when I read through it, I was like, wow, do they talk really talk? Especially the part where they intrinsically come into place. So, and it's really, really fascinating to know about Achebe's influence because I know Achebe's influence on, writers of nowadays is quite impressive and, it is undisputably great. And I'm so excited. Even myself, I love, Things Fall Apart. That is the way, the writing style and everything is quite very exceptional, and I was really, really intrigued by it. So having said that, I'm really intrigued by that. And there's another thing I would like to ask you, Madam Butterfly, is when I read through Curse of the Frog Prince, I realized that, it acts part two because this was actually the first part of the series. So I want to ask you about the progress of your next publication. Could you tell us more about the progress of your next publication?
Well, at the time of this interview, I am currently writing the final chapter of Curse of the Frog Prince Part 2. And I expect I should be done with it by the end of this month, and then it's going to officially be my editor's problem. And that will probably make it so that the book will be ready for me to publish it in either early January or late January. I'm not sure yet, but it's most likely going to be around then. And something I will tell you with this up and coming story is that in the story, I do answer a lot of questions that you read in the first book, and that in this story, you will get to learn more about how magic functions in this particular world and more about the kingdom that the frog comes from.
Wow, that's fantastic. That is extremely fantastic. And I cannot wait for that book. Probably when that is published, I'd love to, read it and also review it on this channel and probably invite you for another set of an interview. That's great. There's also something I wanted to ask you because I know most writers have, might have faced some one or two challenges while writing their book. I want to ask you, what kind of challenge do you face while writing this book, Curse of the Frog Prince? And if there's any challenge you face, how were you able to, overcome it? How long also does it take you to, produce this impressive novel?
Well, with challenges I came to writing this book, the first one I mentioned to you earlier, where I was telling myself there was no way I was going to write another book when I was already working on two, and the idea for this book popped in my head. Because I would be working on 3 books, I had to accept I had to pick one of my books to dial back a little bit of work on in order to write the third. In addition to that, there was also getting to know my characters because King Ofuri, when I originally wrote him, he was a bit of a flat villain. He didn't really have a whole lot of intriguing things about him other than he was just a bad person. So I had to really work with that character and get to know him better and get to know his reasoning for why he does the thing he does, which I'm grateful I did because I was able to evolve him into a more interesting villain. And the last, probably worst thing that I did have to endure while writing the story was entering what I like to call writer's hell. When you enter into the final few chapters and you're really close to being done, but you get stressed out because the end goal is just so far away. And I actually did really get myself a little too stressed with that because it was my first book, and I started doing things like playing music while I write in order to de-stress myself.
Yes, yes. I know that's the case with most indie authors, and that's one of the things they do baffles with. Okay, Madam Butterfly, is there anything that you would love to share with the viewers concerning your book, Curse of the Frog Prince? Is there anything you would love the viewers to know that I probably might not mentioned in my interview that you just like, the viewers to know about Curse of the Frog Prince?
Well, the first thing I would really like to talk to the viewers about is when you buy the book, actually look at my cover, because so many people always just pay attention to the frog on the ball only, and they just arbitrarily decide it's a children's book because they're only looking at the frog on the ball. They just completely ignore the fact that there is a blood-soaked knife on the cover and get all excited to read the children's book because they see the frog on the ball, even though it's clearly not a kid's book because there is a bloody knife on the cover. And the next thing I would tell them is to go into the story with more of an open mind and subvert any pre-built expectations that they have when it comes to one of my stories, because I really like to surprise my readers and do a lot of things that are unexpected in order to make the story more fun. So just go into my stories with an open mind and be fully prepared to have a fun time with a lot of really good surprises.
Yeah, yeah, the book is not for kids, it's for adults. That's quite intriguing. Thank you very much for the answer to that question. Okay, Madam Butterfly, as a published author, what sort of advice do you have for people who are still struggling with producing a book? What sort of advice do you have with authors who are still, struggling to putting up their work out there and, putting out their work out there? What kind of advice would you like to give to writers who are still in the verge of publishing a book?
Well, for everyone out there who, really wants to get their book finished and struggling, what I would advise you to do is first plan out a schedule of when you want to write. And let people know, don't bother you. This is my time to write. And just sit down in front of whatever device you wish to use to do your writing and just let yourself write. And if your mind just wants to bug you, don't forget to take periodic breaks and even do things like listening to music so that you can just write your book. And also, do not get yourself stressed out if you go through several drafts. Like all stories, you're going to write a bunch of horrible first drafts, second drafts, third drafts, 15th drafts before you finally get to that sweet spot, which is your novel, and everything just starts to come out the way that it's supposed to.
Thank you very much. Yeah, just do it. Most people just have to do it. Most writers just have to do it. And we know that writing cannot be very easy, but you just have to do it. So thank you very much, Mrs. Madam Butterfly, for accepting the invitation to be featured on P English Literature. I really appreciate it. So viewers, here is it. Curse of the Frog Prince. The part one book. It's a fiction novel. It is currently available on Amazon for a few dollars. It is absolutely fascinating, and I really enjoy my time while reading through it. And it's really a pleasure as we've just spoken with the author of the book. So the book is currently available on Amazon. I want to urge you to get it out on Amazon. It is absolutely fascinating, and it's something that you really enjoy reading. Thank you very much, Madam Butterfly, for accepting the invitation to be featured on P English Literature once again. Thank you very much.
And thank you so much for inviting me. And this was just a blast. I had a lot of fun.